What would cause a 15-year-old, we'll say her name is Jackie, and we're changing all of this information to protect the individual's identity. What would cause a 15-year-old to be depressed, anxious, and tired? Now, automatically, what do we think? Oh, we think, oh, well, that's just depression. Like, Dr. K, come on, it's depression. Like, how do you not know that, right? That is our automatic response. Except, what if depression is not always depression? And what if this concept of depression, at least some of the time, is actually incorrect? And in the case of Jackie, the reason why this family came to see me is because this poor thing had had long-standing issues, and ultimately at the age of 15, age is made up, got to a place where they tried multiple medications, seen psychiatrists, tried SSRIs, tried other medications, and nothing was really helping her. And her depression was getting to the point where it was really impacting her ability to function, impacting her ability to go to school, impacting her ability to live her life. And the family's like, we don't know what else to do. So they came to see me because apparently I'm the guy you see when you don't know what else to do. Now, Jackie's story was really interesting because it turns out that Jackie just didn't suddenly become depressed at the age of 14. It's not like all of a sudden, boom, happy, healthy-go-lucky individual just fell apart. And this is what's so important. And this is what we actually miss from our practice of medicine. We miss the ability to connect the dots. And we say, oh, well, Jackie's tired and she's lacking motivation and she's anxious. Well, all of those kind of look like depression. So therefore it's depression and therefore we give you medication. But what about all the historical data points about the human being? Don't those matter? In the case of Jackie, she was the kid that never crawled, or crawled really late, I should say. She was late to walk. She was never the athletic kid. She preferred to kind of sit and play quietly. When she would exert herself, playing soccer or football or whatever, she'd run for a little bit and kind of slow down. And her entire life, she was just not the most energetic kid. She would run a little bit, slow down. When she was older and she had reached kind of her early adolescence, late childhood, she'd do some activities, but never was really the most active individual. And over time, one of the things that the family had noticed was that she was also just becoming more and more sensitive. That everything would bother her. Even as a little kid, birthday parties, she just kind of get overwhelmed and really wouldn't want that. Except all of those things didn't seem to matter with the diagnosis that she got at the age of 14 with depression. And this is the part of medicine that we need to look at. This is the part of medicine that we need to stand back and say, well, don't those things matter? Don't those things matter in terms of our understanding of the human being? And I'm not judging psychiatry. I'm not judging our practice of mental health. I think antidepressants for the right person are amazing. I'm not questioning any of that. I am questioning, why is it that we don't take all of these other factors into account? It turns out for Jackie, when we tested her urine, there's a test you can do called a urine organic acid. And any integrative holistic doctor can run this. There's multiple companies that can do it. You can actually do it through the regular lab. It's a little hard to interpret, but you can do it. When we ran this test, what we found were significant issues with how she can produce energy. She had a metabolic disorder. And a metabolic disorder is basically a disorder in metabolism. Now, why is that important? Well, we eat food, right? And we just presume that all people can eat food and produce energy, right? It just miraculously happens, right? Voila, we have magic, we have energy. Is that really the case? Energy production is ultimately a set of biochemical pathways. There are enzymes in pathways that ultimately take food, protein, fat, carbohydrates, and what do? They break these foods down, keep breaking these foods down until ultimately they get dumped into our mitochondria, and you've heard me talk about the mitochondria before, right? These foods ultimately get broken down, get dumped into the mitochondria, and then the mitochondria convert those compounds into ATP. What is ATP? Electricity. Our body runs on electricity. So imagine a car that you pour gasoline in, right? And ultimately that gasoline needs to get converted to power. Except in the case of that car, the engine is so shot that the production of power is 30% of what it should be. Now, if it was your car and your car was behaving like that and you're like, my God, why is this thing not running? What would you do? You'd take it to the mechanic and say, hey, this engine is not working, fix it. Why is it that we have such a different thought about the human body? Because the human body is ultimately the most sophisticated machine ever made. It is a machine. It's a bunch of biochemical pathways and processes that do all kinds of miraculous things. And in the case of Jacki, what we found was that she had a massive error in how she was able to convert fats to energy. So fatty acid oxidation, fat oxidation, which is basically breakdown of fats to energy, was completely shot. Her markers were off the charts. And she also happened to have a bunch of issues with her mitochondria. So she couldn't break down fats to turn them into energy. And then once the energy was getting dumped into the mitochondria themselves were all mucked up. And this is why this poor thing never really crawled. She was late to walk. She wasn't the most athletic kid. Why? Because every time she would come to exert herself, she lacked the energy. So what do kids do? When they lack energy, they just don't do it. It's common sense, to them at least. We don't know what to make of it. We say, oh, Susie she's just not too active. It's just how Susie is. Why? When we put these things together, all of a sudden, what is happening later on makes complete sense. Now, what does energy production have to do with depression, right? That's probably why you're asking, like, why are you barking up this tree? Think about it. If you're tired, if you're run down, how does that make you feel? Just dragging, right? Which is kind of what we call depression. But it's not just that. It's not just the draggy feeling. The adrenal glands are one of the most energy-hungry organs in the body. They're really, really finicky organs. And when mitochondrial energy production goes off, the adrenal glands go off, which compounds the cruddy feeling that you have. This thing, the brain, is uber sensitive to energy production. I'm sure you've all seen movies where there's like little sparks going off in the brain and there's like little signals and electricity kind of going back and forth. How does that happen? Is it just poof, these cells just miraculously send signals back and forth? No, energy. The brain cells are the most energy hungry cells, and the brain is the most energy hungry organ in the entire body. You all know that. This is common sense. Everyone knows that the brain uses more energy per gram than any other organ in the body. When there is lack of energy, there's actually a specific term for it. You can look it up. It's called synaptic fatigue, which basically means that the cells have gotten to the point where they're so tired that their signaling is actually altered. That's like, imagine you got the cross guard, right? And cross guards are like controlling traffic or people talking to one another, except you're just so tired. You're like, I don't know if I really want to talk right now. I don't know if I really want to do anything. I'm just going to sit down. Except it's your brain cells doing this. So cell-to-cell signaling, neuronal signaling actually starts becoming altered when energy production is low. The other part that's really interesting that goes a step beyond this is the brain's ability to control information flow. Now, what does that mean? We take information in through sight, sound, movement, our skin, right? Tactile. All this information comes into our brain. And we just presume that the brain also automatically knows how to filter all of that and miraculously make sense of all of this. And there are, if you were put in kind of computer lingo, terabytes of information constantly flooding the brain. There's massive amounts of information coming into the brain. I'm sure you've all heard of GABA. right? GABA is the most important calming compound in the brain. And there are actually cells called GABAergic neurons, neurons that produce GABA. There are GABAergic neurons in the frontal cortex, the part of our brain that is actually tasked with managing information flow. And it turns out that these suckers, these GABAergic neurons that are in the frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex if you want to be exact, these guys are the most energy sensitive cells in the entire brain. And they are essentially the cross guards of information coming in. And it turns out that when you have a mitochondrial error, when you have energy production issues, not only do your adrenal glands get thrown off, not only do you feel tired, not only do other parts of the system get thrown off, not only does synaptic fatigue happen, most importantly, it turns out that these GABAergic neurons start getting distorted in their functioning. And literally the cross guards of the brain, the cross guards that are controlling information flow, decide to take a coffee break in the middle of the day. And their coffee break lasts like 5 hours. They show up late to work because they're just too tired. And then, in the middle of a busy traffic kind of intersection, they're like, I'm so tired right now. I'm just going to sit down. I'm just going to have some coffee. While there's a traffic jam and everything is getting stuck, these guys just decide to take a 4-hour break. What does that do? It causes sensory overwhelm. It causes the experience of anxiety. If you look around, this shows up all over us, all around us. These are people that get totally overwhelmed when they go into loud, crowded spaces. And I've talked about sensory processing issues, and this compounds, this magnifies the sensory processing issues that are there. So it's almost like there's a quadruple whammy that takes place when energy production goes off. And in the case of Jacki, all we did was put her on a metabolic cocktail, and there's tons of great products out there. Neuroneeds, which I have no affiliation with, is one company that I've mentioned before that I happen to like because their product is just good. I don't make any money by saying their name. It just happens to be something that I found effective. We put her on that metabolic cocktail, and there's other really good ones out there. And we put her on some additional carnitine because her fatty acid metabolism was really shot, and carnitine is the best way to fix that. We did that, and I just said, okay, check in with me in a few weeks. So I checked in with them. I'm like, how's Jacki doing? Mom's like, she's doing so much better. I'm like, what do you mean? Oh my God, she's happier. She started exercising. She's not sitting there sulking all the time. She's not feeling as anxious now that I think about it. I was like, oh, isn't that cool? She's like, oh my God, this is a miracle. I'm like, no, it's not a miracle. This is basic physiology. This is basic physiology that we miss because we get so caught up in, depression is anhedonia, right? Lack of desire to do things. Depression is basically lack of desire to do things, just kind of feeling tired and anxious, and therefore that's depression. No. In the case of this young lady, depression was actually a metabolic issue. And we need to be looking for these things. We need to start thinking about things in this way because we can make so much of a difference in the lives of so many people when we start reconstructing our understanding of things like depression. And I have no issue with antidepressants. I have no issue with pharmaceuticals that can help people. If it's helping you, fantastic. Keep using it. I have no problem with our practice of psychiatry. Psychology therapy is fantastic. But we get so caught up in saying this is all there is to mental health, and we kind of forget that there's a whole world of physiology, important physiology, that can completely derail the nervous system and the entire human body. So Jacki was one case where all we had to do was a few basic simple supplements, and this human being came to life. She started shining. She started feeling better. And these kinds of opportunities are all around us to help people. We just don't know to look for them. So please share this information with others. Let's get this kind of information out there. Let's start making a real difference in the lives of people, and people who are stuck, people who are suffering. Let's at least let them know that there is another way to help. Thank you for watching. This is Dr. K. Be well.